You're listening to the Beyond Measurements and Image podcast, where we build healthier lifestyles, elevate your well-being, and transform lives. Welcome to BMI.
I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and obesity medicine specialist. Thank you for joining me today on Beyond Measurements and Image. Our kids are always watching. They watch how we spend our time, how we face challenges, and how we care for ourselves. Long before they put on a jersey to step onto a field in court, they're learning what health, discipline, and resilience look like through the lives that we lead. That's why today's episode is about more than just youth sports or staying active as adults. It's about the legacy we create through our choices. When we commit to movement, prioritize health, and live with intention, we give our children an example to follow and a foundation to build on. In today's conversation, we'll talk about how to inspire kids to embrace activity, why our own commitment matters, and how shaping our habits today can shape our families for generations to come. Let's get into it.
Hey everyone, I'm Hailey Crawford, your host's oldest daughter. This week, I get the special honor of stepping into the host seat to interview my dad. As a loyal listener to the BMI Podcast, I thought it would be interesting to share what it was like growing up in a household that valued staying active and exploring new activities, and how those experiences have shaped all of us to this day. My dad has always led by example when it comes to health, whether it was encouraging us to explore new sports or activities, showing us what true health and wellness looks like, or simply living out the values he talks about here on this podcast. So today, I'm highlighting him. Dad, thanks for letting me turn the mic on you today.
Well, thanks for being here.
As your listeners probably know, you have 6 kiddos, and you have encouraged all of us when growing up to try new sports or activities. What was the philosophy behind that approach?
Well, I think with physical activity and team sports with kids, I think it's important for multiple reasons. A big portion of it, of course, is the physical activity itself, but there's so much more from sports that are there to be learned. So the main thing isn't wins and losses like we're taught. The skills that you learn from teamwork and working together and self-discipline and self-motivation, those are really the things that you learn. And there's no better venue to teach kids that, because then ultimately they can apply that later in life, like in high school and in college and in work. If they've developed self-discipline and self-motivation and they've developed those skills. If you tried to teach that in a classroom setting, it would probably fall on deaf ears. But when you teach it in a sports setting, of course, they are mesmerized with the sport and they're focused on the wins and losses. And the wins and losses are no doubt very important. But it's not the day of the game that matters. It's all the preparation up to the game. I understand there's a lot of kids out there that don't play sports. They play instruments or they're on chess. I mean, like there's other avenues to learn these same skills. But just as a health and wellness podcast, this is the avenue that we're discussing. So I'm well aware that there's plenty of other options out there that aren't sports or physical activity related. But I do think the physical activity is still important, even if you're doing some non-sports related event to learn these life lessons, right? Currently in America, our pediatric obesity rate's somewhere around 20 to 25%. So it's only going to get worse with AI and more computers and less gym class and less funding, right? These aren't going to just resolve themselves. You have to have intention. You have to have intention for yourself, and you have to have intention for your kids to help develop them and get them on the right course. When you're younger, you want to get the kids involved in that so that they're learning those life skills that really can't be taught in other venues, or it's difficult to teach in other venues. So that's the ultimate goal of sports with kids for me.
So with your kids and the different sports that are out there, there's obviously different cultures on different types of teams. How did you balance letting your kids find their own path while still nudging them to still stay active?
Well, I think it's important. You know, it's interesting when you look at kids in today's generation, there's so much pressure from parents to do well. And so what we know is when a kid gets on a team in current society, a kid gets on a team, and maybe let's just say T-ball is the sport, and they're not very good at T-ball. But they start practicing, maybe mom and dad buy them a tee, and they just start working at it and they get better. And so at the end of the season, they made significant progress. So then the next season, the parents oftentimes think that their kid has made so much progress that he's going to make that much progress every year. And so there becomes this expectation that the kid's going to continue on the same trajectory that they were when they went from not having any skills to in that first year or first couple of years, they develop some skills and they get better. The parents then oftentimes think, well, that's going to continue. So they start to just really push the kid. And of course, today you can't just sort of dabble in sports. It's almost like you have to be committed to a sport very early on. So then there's so much external pressure on these kids to play in that sport. And the thought is that they will just continue to do better. And the parents will say, look back at last year, you made such improvement and now you've just leveled off. There's a lot of advantages to sports, but one of the problems is we're not allowing kids to self-select in and out of sports. So it used to be if a kid, let's just say a kid was playing baseball and he's playing with his buddies and they'd go down to the park, and at some point it would become apparent to that kid that maybe he wasn't as good a hitter or he couldn't run as fast to the base. And so he would ultimately just self-select out of that sport. And in doing so, he could then find another sport. Now kids don't really have that advantage because there's so much parental pressure and maybe even societal pressure that, you get on a sport, you commit, and the thought is, you just continue and you'll get better. We all have some genetic top, that we just can't get better. And there's always room for improvement, but sometimes you just can't get there. And oftentimes I think kids can't meet those expectations. So I think it's important to recognize that, each kid's going to be different and to let them kind of find their way, but to support them. And any physical activity is better than just being at home, sitting on the couch, gaming or whatever. Two things more on that. Although I'm sitting in the interview chair and I'm getting all of the questions, I want to be very upfront that all of the sporting events, all the activities, that was a 2-parent household thing. And Mama Bear had a lot to do with that, arguably more than me. Full credit to her on that. Let me say there's one other thing that just kind of an interesting story that I think kind of highlights maybe the question that you're asking. Houston, who you got to meet in the last podcast, he was quite small as he was growing. And so my wife, being a pediatrician, was concerned and, took him to all these different specialists trying to figure out if there was some sort of, growth hormone deficiency or whatever. Clearly, whatever it was just delayed, and he's 6'1" now, and he's caught up. But when he was in about, I'm going to guess maybe 3rd grade, Mom put him on a basketball team, and he was probably, a solid 6 or 7 inches shorter than everybody else on the team. And he had 0% interest in being on that team. But Lisa, to her credit, wanted him exposed to basketball. I don't know that he ever played after that, but sometimes just exposure to the different sports are all that's necessary to then determine if, in fact, that's something you're interested in.
I think this also rings true when it comes to Holden, my little brother that is handicapped. When he was about 6 years old, I think that's about the time that Hayden and I started doing our sports, probably around 1st grade, t-ball, soccer, basketball, you name it. We were probably in it. And Holden, with his disabilities, he wasn't able to do the traditional sports. My dad was an avid runner. He did marathons left and right. And so when it was Holden's time, he popped Holden into a little running stroller and pushed him along those courses with him. I'm going to shout my dad out. In 2007, there was a Tulsa World article written about him and Holden and their experience on these running courses together. I think it really encapsulates the household that we grew up in. The article itself is called A Father's Love. A couple quotes that I pulled from it. Holden, now 6, is at the age when his older brother Hayden and older sister Hailey started playing sports. It was just time to get him started. Drew's not going to accept the fact that he has a handicapped child right now, and he's just going to make the most of it. That's what he's doing. But that doesn't surprise me. That's Drew. He's just a great guy. I think that kind of just highlights that there was no perfect mold for all your kids. You just kind of found what fit them and their personality type and their abilities. You and Mom both provided to the specifics of each kid and didn't just kind of push it onto us. Can you expand on that?
For one, you all are individuals. Even when you're little like that, you just have your own characteristics and you have your own drive. It's interesting. You look at Hannah, she's been singularly focused on volleyball since 5th grade. It really essentially played no other sports, right? And then you played every sport along the way. everybody just has a different means of finding what it is for them that gets them the benefits of the physical activity and the social environment that's there. And it's also, been well documented that there's cognitive improvement in kids that play sports. Even the time of day that they play sports matters. I would love to say that I had this all planned out perfectly and just executed it exactly. A lot of it was just sort of doing what I thought was best, what mom thought was best. And in the end, I think a lot of it turned out really well. I would say Holden was in a near drowning accident and he ended up with an anoxic brain injury. So that's where his disabilities come from. Prior to that, Holden was completely able-bodied, rowdy little kid. And during that time, and even before he was born, I was a runner and, I did a little bit of casual, weightlifting or physical activity, kind of hitting the gym, but it wasn't something that was a major part of my daily routine. Running was a major part of my daily routine at that point, and maybe biking, but it was just sort of for personal enjoyment. I can clearly remember when Holden had his accident, he was in the ICU for not quite 3 weeks, and then he went to rehab for 3 or 4 months. And I can remember in rehab, now he's 4 years old. So, I can't remember what a 4-year-old would weigh, but he was a little kid. He was little and he was easy to pick up and move around. He was not an issue. But I remember thinking one night when I was in rehab, I was spending the night there with him. And I was just thinking the writing was on the wall. Like it seemed very obvious at that point that he wasn't going to walk again. And these disabilities were real and that this was a lifelong thing. I made a conscious effort that knowing at that point that I was going to have to make sure that I was in shape to take care of him. But I can remember, those yellow and black dumbbells I have, you can slide them every other plate. One's yellow, one's black, one's yellow, one's black, and you can just sort of move them to add more weight or you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I had those already. And so I remember taking them up to the rehab unit and just kind of started working out. A little bit was to pass the time, but it's also just one of those things where I just thought, this is just going to be part of my life. I can't not maintain some degree of physical health and have a handicapped child. Like that just doesn't, it's not going to be best for him. It's not going to be best for anybody else. And so I literally started working out while he was in rehab. Just subtle little things. But as you can attest, there's probably very few days that go by that I'm not in the gym that we have here at the house working out. And yes, some of it's still for Holden. A lot of it is just because it works well for me and it's just part of my brain. In the end, I just think it's best. I think it's best for me. I think it's best for the family. I think it's best for Holden. I just think that, general health and wellness, if people would take the time to think intentionally about what it is they want to do, nobody wants to be 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 200 pounds, whatever. Nobody wants to be overweight. Nobody wants to be out of shape. Nobody wants to be weak. I just think sometimes they don't intentionally outline a plan for themselves, even if it's not a detailed plan, even if it's just, gosh, I need to make sure I can pick up and move my son, or I need to be able to do this so that maybe my wife doesn't get hurt. But it's basically across the board. And so I don't know that I've ever told that story to anybody. I think it's not a coincidence that his brothers are able and do pick him up and move him, take him to bed, and do the things that they need to do as well. I don't know that those words were ever relayed. It's just like anything in family. If one person can't do it, everybody else kind of steps in and does it. And in this case, physical activity and strength to some extent and mobility and agility just have to factor in to people who have a disabled kid. Over time, I just think, if you can put yourself in a situation where you're going to minimize injury to yourself, you're going to be of better service to that kiddo.
Speaking to your kids being older now, are there signs that you see that those early habits of trying new things and staying active that are stuck with us today?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's interesting. We talked earlier, when you're young, you want to get your kids in sports for the cognitive benefits, the social benefits, not to mention, like we already talked about, the self-discipline and the self-motivation. Those are all very important. But as you age, team sports become less and less of a thing in adulthood. In fact, it's estimated that less than 3% of adults participate in any sort of team sport after they graduate high school. Of that 3%, a lot of those, of course, are college athletes. And then after that, it's pretty much be on a church basketball league or t-ball or softball team. But as a general rule, team sports just become less and less important in terms of physical activity as we age. But what does become important is the ability to identify some sort of physical activity that you can maintain in adulthood. So like today, Hayden, my oldest son, and I, we ran about 10 miles because he's training for a marathon. You and Hayden and Hunter have all done Ironman training and marathons. So these are all things that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I asked any of you guys to participate in an Ironman or a marathon. I think those are all things that you came to me with, and then we did them. So I do think that having the example out there of things to do and then engaging you in sports early and the benefits of physical activity, then now these are your ideas. They're not my ideas. They're just a part of who you are, no different than your work ethic and everything else that makes up who you are.
When it comes to doing all of these different things like the Ironman, would I ever personally want to do that without having a dad and a brother to do that alongside me with? Probably not. You never pushed anything on me, but you always made sure that I was included in the event that was happening. So when it came to the Ironman, Hayden did it with you first. I had no desire to do it. But the second year it came around and Hunter wanted to do it, well, I couldn't be outnumbered by both of my brothers doing the Ironman and me not doing it. So I think there's, some sibling rivalry, and it was all on my terms, but I always felt included.
Well, and the other thing that is, really fun, and I think, of all the training, the three of you and myself did the Ironman, but Joe and I, we had the unique advantage. When you were training, you were in college. So you were about an hour away. When Hayden was training, he was in college. So he was about an hour away. So a lot of the training that was done in solitary. You did your part there. Hayden did his part there. But when I trained with Hunter, Hunter was still in high school. From a completely selfish perspective, I wanted to do the Ironman with you guys, just to toe the line, just to be there in those wetsuits. Incredible thing to get to do with your kid, standing outside of that lake together with your kids. I mean, that's an amazing feeling, not to mention what the finish line feels like. But the real fun of the Ironman in particular, or even these marathons, is just the consistency of getting out and running. If I said, Hunter, let's go spend 2 hours and just talk about life, or let's go do something really miserable, just really uncomfortable for like an hour, like none of those things would have any appeal to him, right? He would not want to go hang out with his dad, I don't think. When it was all in the setting of training for Ironman, we weren't going out to have a chit chat. We were going for a 3-hour ride on a bike. Of course, in those 3 hours, these incredible conversations unfold. Or you go for a run for 2 hours, or, you're swimming, which we didn't talk at all because I was trying not to drown. But the event itself was singularly inconsequential compared to all the training time and all the special conversations that were had leading up to the time we towed the line.
So obviously there's a lot that I've learned when it comes to being active post-grad. It's not as in my face. I don't have intramurals in college with my sorority friends, or I don't have my team like I did in high school. Now I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do and still trying to maintain it, but it being a whole new world in a way. So I've learned a lot from my siblings, but I've really learned a lot from you. Do you ever feel like you were learning as much from us as we have from you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a two-way street, right? And it's not necessarily dad to kid, right? It's just maybe experienced. Let's just take running, like somebody with a lot of experience versus somebody that's learning. So sometimes you vocalize things when you're teaching that really impart more knowledge to you. When you're dealing with your kids, you really want what's best for them, right? I mean, when you're participating in something, let's just say running, for example, when you're a part of a race, you want to win, you're pushing yourself. The only thing that might have more importance in the moment is if your kid is running, right? You want your kid to meet with success more than you would ever want to meet with success. I can remember being at races and just thinking, when you run, you think that you're getting tired, right? You think that you're uncomfortable, and you are. But the reality of it is you have so much more in yourself to give. There's so much more that your body is able to do than your mind is going to allow you to do. When you have that kind of knowledge, it's one thing to try to convince yourself of that when you're in pain. It's another thing to help your kid to understand that. And so when you're going through that process with your kid and you're running and you're telling your kid to override his amygdala, right? That's the part of the brain that wants you to stop, right? When you're running alongside of him, yelling at him to F his amygdala because he can do better. And then he wins the race because of that. That is a way that you learn from your kids. I've done a lot of runs. I've done a lot of bike rides. I mean, I've done a lot of these things, but I've never been on a podium, right? I mean, it's not like I'm winning anything. I'm just doing it. But what I'm winning is I'm getting all this time with my kids, and I have healthy kids and they're active, and and so that's a prize that beats any podium. Although a podium would be nice.
Growing up, going to all of my siblings' sporting events, there were always some parents that maybe took the sport a little more seriously, maybe a little too seriously, more so than their kid, applying some unnecessary pressure. Would you kind of touch on the downsides of physical activity in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. The physical activity component of that, right, continues to be a great asset. But the social component of that, right, if you have a overbearing parent that sets expectations far beyond what the kid can reach, or even maybe just beyond what the kid wants to reach, that does not help with social development, right? That does not help with their social skills. Oftentimes those kids were embarrassed by their parents or their parents' actions, or they felt inadequate. And, a lot of particularly young ladies, right? They have these super high achieving parents with super high expectations. A lot of those young ladies, and to some extent young men, but they end up with eating disorders. And a lot of these guys just, they have these incredibly overbearing dads. They were either star athletes and they expect their kid to be everything that they were, or more importantly, or probably more often, they weren't star athletes. And so they're trying to live vicariously through their kids. And so they're putting pressure on it. And I don't necessarily think that the parents even recognize what they're doing, but it's incredibly harmful to the kids. And it's harmful to that relationship between the parent and the kid. And it just doesn't serve a purpose. So again, physical activity, letting the kid, letting them be themselves and supporting them in that role and encouraging them, getting them off the couch, getting them to do the things they're supposed to do, but doing it lovingly and supportingly. And when you have a kid that's an excellent athlete, other people will notice that and they'll move them along. But it's amazing, you 6 kids, none of you are going to make a living in athletics. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think any of your friends are going to make a living in athletics. And I watched some of your friends or, classmates, and some of them were good athletes, some of them were great athletes, and some of them just really weren't that good. But in the end, like when you graduate, you're all kind of on the same level-ish, right? And nobody's moving on. And so I just think these parents that get so invested and so defined by their kids' athletic abilities are missing the mark because the kids have so much more to offer. I think schools, have a role in promoting that, but that really comes from home. So I would say that's the downside. That's not so much the physical activity. That's just the social construct that we have around sports. And sometimes that just really needs to be checked.
So for any parents or young adults that may be listening that feel intimidated by starting a fitness journey, either for themselves, with or for their kids, what encouragement would you give them?
I mean, the only thing that you really need to do is to just start. If you just start it, then it will follow, right? Consistency is all that you need. If you have the discipline to get up and to get the things done, even if you don't do it in the morning, if you just consistently show up and do it, and that will set an example to your kids also. It's interesting, obesity. If you have one obese parent, when you look at, then the child has a 50% likelihood of being obese, him or herself. If you have 2 obese parents, they have an 80% chance. And yeah, maybe some of it's genetic and maybe some of it's, microbiome. There's different physiologic factors that factor into that obesity. But a lot of it is just the environment, the food that they eat, the lack of exercise, just the daily routine that goes on in the house. So if you find yourself in that situation where you're overweight or you're obese or you're just generally not in shape, and you just start to work on it and your kids see it, they will begin to emulate you. I just think if you begin to model what you want your child to be, whether it's from a health and wellness or academic or spiritual perspective, if you just model it to the best of your ability, they will listen. There's a poem that says, I'd rather watch a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather see your actions than to hear the words you say. And so by getting up and doing these things, You don't have to make a big production of it. You don't have to point it out to your kid that you're doing it, but they'll know you're doing it. They'll see it. And if they see you losing some weight, particularly if they're a little overweight, they may want to jump on. And maybe they don't right then. But as parents, we play the long game, right? You do these things now in hopes that they pick them up later. And if they pick them up earlier, well, that's fantastic. But if not, you're gaining the physical fitness and the wellness, and you have the side note, or you have the side benefit of them watching and learning and being able to see what's going on. Now, the flip side of that's also true, right? If they see you start and you don't meet with success and you quit, well, they see that too. If they always think that it's too hard, it's okay to quit, that's not a lesson that you necessarily want to put on. But if you do quit, it's okay, because then you can start up again. But you just need to make sure that you have some consistency, because in the end, it's just like saving money. You can't just save $10,000 all of a sudden, or most people can't, But you can save a little bit here, a little bit there, and you're just consistently doing it. And the next thing you know, you look at your bank account and you have more money in it than you did. And the same is true with weight and physical activity and just being generally intentional with your health. And kids will notice that. It's consistency and getting started, and then just recognizing that it's never too late. And if you started and you failed and you started and you failed, it doesn't matter how many times you start and fail, just start again. It's like people who smoke. Rarely do people stop smoking the first time they decide to stop smoking, right? They sputter into it. So maybe you sputter into a healthy lifestyle. It's okay. Just get there eventually.
I think from this podcast, a lot of people can see, as a physician, you see health clinically. But I hope now that they can see, as a dad, you see it personally. How do you define true wellness?
Well, that's a tough question. I think wellness has multiple definitions. I think everybody sort of has their own definition of wellness. But I think that in the end, for me, the answer to that question would be, I want the choices I make regarding my diet and my exercise and my lifestyle plan, I want those choices to lead me to a place where I can be the best person I can be for my family, for my kids, for my future grandkids, so that I can be present for them, so that I can have health and wellness late into life, so I can enjoy all the things they do. I don't want to be the granddad that sits in the rocking chair and falls asleep while his grandkids are running around. I want to be out there with them doing these things. I want to teach them to ride a bike. I want to run down the street with them. And so I just think positioning yourself so that you are not putting constraints on your future self, that to me is the real definition of wellness. And it's like everything. You have to balance your health and your wealth and your time, right? We have limited time on this earth. You want to maximize that, right? You want to maximize it with great experiences, but just being present in the lives of the people that matter to you. You have no real control over your time, but you want to make sure that you balance everything you're doing. So if you're eating crappy and you're not working out and you get overweight and you end up with diabetes and a bad heart and all this, then you just can't do those things. Well, you've cheated your future self and your future relationships out of what could be. And so if you just have good intention in the moment for not only what's going on in the moment, but also what's going on in the future, you can balance your health, maybe get more time on the end, but if nothing else, maybe get better time where you're able to participate in the lives of the people that you want to do and meaningfully participate. Not bedridden, not sitting in a chair, not unable to walk, not able to do things. Now, there are always things that happen, right? I mean, people get cancer, people have heart attacks, they get, there's just things that happen that are beyond your control. So if those happen and you end up as the guy in the chair, well, I mean, there you are. That's just what life's given you, and you just have to deal with it, kind of like we talked in our last podcast. But if you just act with intention to make sure the things that you're doing will serve the purposes that you want done later for people that you don't even know today, I think that is the definition of wellness for me.
I know there's no written rule book or playbook when it comes to this game of life or to parenthood, but whenever you and mom decide to write one, I'll be your first purchase. Because I think that, I don't know, looking back on the childhood that I had and now the adulthood that I'm in, I can just see how you and mom's hands were just perfectly in everything, where I have my own dependence, but I still have the fundamental beliefs that you guys have instilled in me.
Well, thank you. That's very sweet. Your mom gets most of the credit for that.
Well, thanks for letting me onto the podcast and letting me interview you for the past hour. It's been a pleasure.
I loved it.
Fun.
I loved it. It's neat talking about these things, and it's really neat watching as you all are young adults now and just kind of going on your way. And you're all physically active. You all are fairly diet conscious. Maybe not the boys so much.
I will say this. Recently, because of the BMI podcast, I have been trying the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
Someone was asking me about the differences between a couple diets, and I was actually able to riddle off the answers. And I was pretty surprised with myself, but it was just, your workings and the efforts that you're putting into this podcast. It's changing lives, and it's helping my brain understand stuff that I didn't even know I needed to understand. So it's been fun getting to work on this with you.
Oh, I've loved it. It's been so much fun. And I think it does some good, but I guess we'll see. I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. Join me next week as we go beyond measurements and image to build healthier lifestyles and elevate your well-being on the BMI Podcast. See you then. The BMI Podcast is provided for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute providing medical advice or professional services. Be sure to check out our description below for our website and social media platforms.